Er ist vielleicht einer der einflussreichsten Journalisten der Welt. Drew Sullivan.
I was a fairly well-known and respected journalist in the United States. And so it's about track record.
Jetzt ist er der Chef des investigativen Journalistennetzwerks OCCRP.
OCCRP is the largest investigative reporting organization on Earth. It's the first global investigative reporting organization. We have editors on all continents. We have staff on all continents.
Auch deutsche Medien arbeiten mit OCCRP zusammen.
And so everything from Panama Papers to the Laundromat to the Pegasus Project all had significant OCCRP reporters. We've been responsible for $10 billion being returned to government coffers from organized crime and corrupt people. You know, huge amounts of money. And we've probably, over that same time period, maybe, $50 million has been spent over our whole history of what we're doing. So if you look at 50 million versus 10 billion, that's a tremendous, that's a 200-time increase in the amount of money that we've brought back. Mm-hmm. It's a 20,000% return on the dollar. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I think as donors have realized this is really important, this is having impact, we've probably been responsible for about 5 or 6 countries changing over from one government to another government. Because, and getting, people, prime ministers indicted or thrown out. It's the most important investigative reporting organization you've never heard of.
Es ist nicht leicht, aufwendige Recherchen zu finanzieren. Drew Sullivan hat ein innovatives Finanzierungsmodell erfunden. Seit der Gründung ist der größte Geldgeber von OCCRP die US-Regierung. Kaum bekannt ist bisher, wie eng die Verflechtung zwischen OCCRP und der US-Regierung ist. Sie hat zum Beispiel Einfluss darauf, wer Verantwortung bei OCCRP trägt. Shannon McGuire ist Programmmanagerin bei USAID, die mächtige Entwicklungsbehörde, die auch Demokratieförderung betreibt. Sie ist zuständig für OCCRP bei der US-Regierung.
What is, as a program manager, what's entailed in a cooperative agreement for OCCRP? What do they need to give you, and what are the things?
There's a substantial involvement clause in a cooperative agreement. So specifically for this cooperative agreement with OCCRP, it's things like reviewing and approving an annual work plan. There's key personnel. If OCCRP needs to change key personnel, for example, the chief of party, which is Drew Sullivan, then they submit a request with a resume, and we review it and say, okay, this we approve your nominee for a new chief of party or whoever it is listed in the key personnel.
Drew Sullivan hat uns viel Zeit für ein Interview gegeben und wir wollen viele offene Fragen klären. Journalismus und Regierungspolitik, wie passt das zusammen? Wie bekommt er die Balance hin?
In the interview with I think Shannon, she said that, and also in cooperative agreements, we know that it's common that you have a clause that USAID must sign off on key personnel. Could you walk us through that process? How do you do that?
Under cooperative agreements, which we don't like to take, that they have, a say on who the people are. But they can veto somebody. If they veto somebody, then we can say we don't take the money. They've never vetoed anybody, and we've never had a problem with this, and they know this ahead of time. I mean, we're very clear about this. And on top of it, we still have an agreement that they cannot interfere with the editorial, content in any way, shape, or form. So you guys get it from a fee that is put on your behalf by the government. We get it more directly from that, but we both have editorial independence, and that's something that we're proud of, and and I'm happy to give back money to donors who don't agree on it. And I know when I'm being influenced. I know when somebody wants to control something in my structure. I know when there's pressure, And we're not going to tolerate it. We have we've won over 100 major awards because of integrity and because of the quality of the work that we do. And that's the rules that you have to have in this game. You have to, it's a very difficult thing to balance investigative reporting money from any donor, but especially government donors.
But do you think the hundreds of journalists who proudly work for OCCRP, that they know that your top personnel has to be approved by the U.S. government, by USAID?
They may well know that, yes. I mean, they take grants from governments themselves, and they have similar types of requirements that they have to sometimes do, and everybody deals with it in the way they have to deal with it. It's usually it's a chief of party, or it's a it's a somebody who's it's one or two positions at the top, which is usually our editors. And we try to protect everybody, in the organizations that partner with us from all this information. We try to keep them away from the donors as much as possible so that they don't have to worry and they don't have to deal with, we're not always successful. There's always some embassy official from some country somewhere, seeking to do something. But, we've never had a problem where we have felt that we were under serious pressure or even mild pressure from a government.
Leyla Bisracic arbeitet mit Drew Sullivan seit 2 Jahrzehnten zusammen und ist OCCRP-Partnerin in Bosnien.
If you are applying for a big grant, multi-million-dollar grant, then USAID is approving chief of party and all the key positions within that grant. That is very common for all the USAID grants. Now, that is, when you think about the journalistic independence, that is problematic. Because again, USAID is deciding upon people. Are they the best? I don't know. Are they just closer to heart of somebody in the US administration? Possibly. He was always very close to USAID people in Washington.
Mike Henning ist seit Jahrzehnten bei USAID für Demokratie und Förderung zuständig.
So basically there's sort of two main kinds of ways the US government does foreign aid. One is through contracts, where we're very specific and directive, and the other is through assistance, which includes grants and cooperative agreements. Grants and cooperative agreements are basically very similar in that they're kind of gifts that we give to an organization saying, you're doing a great thing, here's a gift of some resources, continue doing it. But for certain activities that we like that you're doing, and we want to see you continue those sorts of activities. So it has some strings attached. A cooperative agreement has more strings attached, let's say, than a grant, but it's effectively still an assistance award. It's a gift to an organization to carry out their program. And we like their program, we want to support it. So some of the strings that are attached in a cooperative agreement are approval of key personnel, approval of an annual work plan, approval of sub-grants of a certain amount, above a certain amount. These are rather administrative things, but sometimes significant. And so, for example, OCCRP, which did not get a direct award in the beginning, but there were, let's say, a sub-grantee, so the award that supported OCCRP, that sub-grant to OCCRP would have to be approved by a USAID agreement officer representative or an agreement officer. And now that OCCRP is, I believe, getting a direct award from USAID, the key personnel would be at play. So, who's the editor-in-chief, or who's the CEO, who's the managing editor, et cetera. Those would be sort of a top tier of people that would be approved, and then also an annual work plan. Here's what we're going to do this year, and here's how we're going to do it. And the agency would have ability to question that and engage with the partner on that.
Wie bewerten das andere Journalisten? ProPublica in New York City. Sie haben zahlreiche Pulitzerpreise für ihre Arbeit gewonnen. Steve Engelberg ist der Chefredakteur.
I think at the point at which a funder has influence over the personnel who do the news, that is a very powerful lever, because we all know in journalism that a lot of what happens depends on who does it, right? I mean, who's the editor, who's the reporter, who's the leader, right? You know, the preferences of that person are going to shape the coverage. So I think if you are worried about pleasing a funder, particularly a governmental funder, which has clear viewpoints on things, to me that would be a bit problematical. I would hope that that no independent organization allows itself to give a voice to a funder when one is deciding who's in charge or who writes the stories.
OCCRP betont, das Vetorecht sei rein technischer Natur und ausschließlich für Managementfragen relevant. Die US-Regierung habe keinen Einfluss auf redaktionelle Entscheidungen. Journalismus steht unter Druck. Die Finanzierung gerade von investigativer Arbeit ist schwierig. Wie kann man das Problem lösen? Drew Sullivan legt großen Wert darauf, nicht nur von einem großen Geldgeber abhängig zu sein.
It's a wide distributed group of donors, which is what we want to have. We want to have no one donor dominates. And so you can't say, well, the U.S. government, is your biggest funder. Yes, it's one of the biggest funders, but it's not a huge percentage.
Wir haben die Geldströme verfolgt, aus denen sich OCCRP finanziert. Daraus ergibt sich ein anderes Bild. Die Zuwendungen aller US-Regierungsstellen zusammengerechnet machen seit der Gründung von OCCRP mehr als 50% aus. Damit ist die amerikanische Regierung mit Abstand der größte Geldgeber von OCCRP. In 2016, im Jahr der Panama Papers, waren es über 80% Gelder von der US-Regierung.
I'm very proud to say that I think OCCRP is one of the best achievements that USAID has made in the field of democracy and governance. We were the main funder from the beginning. And there are many others that have come along since and are very welcome, and it's very nice to talk about OCCRP's many supporters now. But at the beginning, the US was the only supporter of the effort in a significant way.
Regarding our first interview in Sarajevo, you said one really important thing. You said you don't have a dominating donor. Would it be wrong to say that the US government is the main donor of OCCRP?
I can give you the numbers. I don't know. It's probably the largest donor. That's clearly the largest donor.
It's from, I don't know, the Middle East, or the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, the INL, the Bureau of Democracy. I mean, it's all different U.S. government grants.
Yeah, if you start counting NED, as being government money, that's also U.S. government money. Yeah, it can get up there. I kind of think of those as different. I look at State Department, USAID as kind of government money, but that may not be right.
The U.S. government is the main donor, though, right? I mean, if you look at...
It's the largest donor of OCCRP, yes. And has been for most of our history. My take is that, it's real simple. I know when I'm being influenced. I know when somebody wants to do something. And actually, of all the money we've taken, I had more problems with Open Society money than I did with U.S. government money. There was never an attempt to influence anything that we were doing. And so, do we wish we didn't have to take it? Yeah. But OCCRP wouldn't exist if we didn't take that money in those years, and even now.
As long as the actual reporting is good, as long as the stories are good, does it really matter where the money comes from?
I would say at the end of the day, it's more a matter of, for me, why we wouldn't do it. It's more a matter of what you become accustomed to, right? If the government is paying half of your payroll, right, it's going to be on your mind. And so, I think I would prefer not to have to think about that.
Laut OCCRP ist der Anteil von Geldern der US-Regierung zwischen 2019 und 2023 von 60 auf 22% gesunken.
We've also researched about corruption, crime scandals in Eastern Europe, in the OCCRP region, that were related to U.S. government or to U.S. big corporations, like Microsoft. I mean, there were different Microsoft scandals, as you might know, in Eastern Europe. Bechtel highways. And we didn't find a really big OCCRP story on any of that. No Microsoft, no Bechtel, no Exxon, no Chevron. Does that surprise you?
No, if you are funded by the U.S. government, there are certain topics that you would simply not go after because the U.S. government has its interests that are above all the others. So, no, it doesn't surprise me. It simply doesn't.
The USAID people told us that basically everyone who gets major grants or OCCRP directly cannot report on the US, that you would need a waiver to do so. Is that why OCCRP did no story on these renditions, secret prisons, and torture in Eastern Europe?
No, I mean, that was in the early years of OCCRP. That was a difficult story to do. We didn't see it as being, I don't remember it as being something that we were particularly interested in, just because, we're interested in organized crime and corruption, and that wasn't, strictly in our bailiwick. I think when the policy that we have is that we don't report on a country with their own money. So any government money that we get, we don't report on it. And usually it's also I think the U.S. government doesn't allow you to, and so, but even on other countries that don't have those stipulations, we don't do it because, it puts you in kind of a conflict of interest, and you kind of want to stay away from those situations. We have other money to do it. We've reported on the U.S. government. We reported on the CIA buying weapons from, a bunch of Balkan places, and it ended up in the hands of ISIS. They were not happy about that, and I had a number of questions afterwards. After that story came out. I just simply said, you didn't know about it.
I think it's correct to say that the work of OCCRP is in harmony with U.S. foreign policy at the broadest level, because the work of independent journalists is an important part of promoting democracy, which is an important part of our foreign policy.
I mean, if you look at the Foreign Assistance Act, it says several times in there that the funds should be used to advance American foreign policy.
It does advance American foreign policy when you have good investigative reporters around the world. That's why they gave us the grant in the first place. When corruption is addressed in places and corruption is outed in places, that there's already been a decision that advances foreign policy because they gave us the grant. I don't care that it advances their foreign policy. I'm asking money to do a particular thing, and if they're going to give it to me, then that's fine. It's not ideal. I'm fully aware, and we balance this and have balanced this successfully for 17 years of doing this, and it's difficult at times to do this, but it's flexible enough where we're able to do that.
They pretty much confirmed that the money from USAID and other state donors implies that with this money you cannot report on US matters.
That is a restriction, obviously, that in the wonderful ivory tower world that I live in at ProPublica, we would not accept that. We do not allow people to impose restrictions on our reporting. That is how we look at it. And again, if you go to the examples of the for-profit enterprises, I don't think that the New York Times would accept an advertisement from the Ford Motor Company and say, but you can't write about Ford. That will be unacceptable. We would say, well, if that's what you want, then I think we have a problem here.
Der Vorstand von OCCRP schreibt uns, OCCRP ist es nicht gestattet, Gelder der US-Regierung für Berichte über die USA im Allgemeinen zu verwenden, nicht nur für kritische Berichte über die USA.
So, where did the first funds come for OCCRP?
So the first funds came from United Nations Democracy Fund.
So steht es auf der Website von OCCRP. Alles begann mit der UNO.
When you talk about the creation, right, the creation of OCCRP.
I think it's fair to say that without U.S. support, OCCRP would not exist. Because the reality is that funding is always a constraint. So there are a lot of great people with great ideas, and the funding is limited. So the job of people at USAID, like myself, is to try to sift through what are the worthy ideas and what are the needs in any country context. And so USAID and someone like me is extremely lucky when someone like Drew Sullivan and Don Pine, who was his partner at the time, walk in the door with a great idea and say, hey, we think that this would really work. It's a bit of a risk, but we want to try this. And then it's the job of someone in my position to sort of weigh that, consider it, see if it fits within a portfolio that we have or responds to any open solicitation that we have, and then put the money to match that.
We're proud that we're the first public donor, that USAID is the first public donor, and the U.S. government is the first public donor to OCCRP. But we're proud of that, but we're also aware that and mindful of how uncomfortable sometimes the relationship can be.
So the collaboration between USAID and state law enforcement unit, I think, was essential to getting the whole thing off the ground. Law enforcement would be interested because the ability to uncover corrupt schemes and often international schemes is incredibly complicated, and having more eyes, more talent allocated to unraveling these networks, finding out where the assets have been hidden and how the money's been laundered, and using offshore and other facilities. This kind of work is incredibly complicated, and the more eyes and hands on it, the better. And sometimes, of course, I think the beauty of investigative reporters and truly independent journalists, and independent in a serious way, is that people will talk maybe more to a journalist than they might necessarily to a government official. And so having journalists do this work maybe, I think, lends a certain, reduces some fear and encourages more openness, because people do, even some people that are aware of criminal activities, they also sometimes want to see justice done. So, but it's tricky if you're dealing directly with law enforcement. So law enforcement is happy to have other external actors do that kind of work.
So USAID or USAID told us in the same room that you're in right now that the original money for OCCRP came from INL, which is the law enforcement and narcotics part of the State Department.
I think, okay, yeah, that might be right. So we put in a unsolicited proposal. Yeah, so that would have been, yes, it would have been INL.
But what I don't understand is, why don't you just say in your website that the original funding for OCCRP came from the law enforcement division of the State Department?
Well, that's a technicality, you're right, John, but you have to understand, looking at it from our perspective, all this was what we needed to do to orchestrate the money. And we really considered kind of the UN money as being, that's how we started OCCRP.
I think Drew's just nervous about being linked with law enforcement. Yeah.
But why?
Because sources, maybe, right? If people that are going to give you information think, oh, you're just an arm of, you're just a cop, right? I mean, maybe it's a problem. Or and other governments, say you're trying to get into a country and do something, and the government says, what are you, law enforcement or not, right? There's a need that, the separation, the independence is important, because if you lose that, you lose your sense of it's a value. Your reputation is incredibly important. If you lose it, then you. And that's I would say that would be like a threat if it was seen as too connected
to law enforcement.
Yeah.
Der Director for Security and Law Enforcement beim State Department war damals David Hodgkinson. Heute hat er eine leitende Funktion bei der Koordinationsstelle der amerikanischen Nachrichtendienste.
A guy named Dave Hodgkinson asked you to submit an unsolicited proposal.
We came to him with an idea, and then he said the best way to do this, to get this money, is to put in for an unsolicited proposal. That's a vehicle you can use to get money. And then INL really didn't do, they were doing kind of law enforcement work, and so what they did is they got the money and then they turned it over to USAID.
Right, USAID administered it, but the money came from the State Department's Law Enforcement and Narcotics Division.
Yes.
I'm just trying to figure out if we should say accurately that the first money for OCCRP came from the US government.
That may be accurate.
OCCRP betont, dass OCCRP als Rechtsform erst später gegründet worden sei. Man betrachte die UNO als Initialförderer.
We also have appearance of conflict. And appearance of conflict is a real thing. Because the only thing that you have in the end is your trust of your readers. So if the readers have doubts because of an appearance, that's a real thing to worry about as journalists. I do believe that. I don't want to take money from the government. ProPublica does not take money from the government. We wouldn't consider doing it. Frankly speaking, on some rare occasions where the government has come to us and said, would you like to do some training of journalists overseas, we'll pay you for it, we would say no. We would do it voluntarily. I just don't want their money.